All right, so I'm in a stoic mood today. I think we're going to be discussing a fairly philosophical topic, a fairly difficult one too, something that probably not a lot of people like to hear, but they need to hear it. Everybody needs to hear it, and they need to take it to heart. So the topic today will be maturing, what that looks like, how to do it, where it comes from, and my journey, I suppose. So, this was partly inspired by some of the people in my life that I see make really egregious and ridiculous decisions consistently. Adults, people who are in the real world, um, they make decisions that are bad, that are out of touch with reality, and they pretty much choose to ignore the consequences, which you really shouldn't do. So, what does it mean to be mature? I guess that's a good starting point. Um, I think the best definition I can come up with for maturity, and not like a dictionary definition, like a practical, real definition. Maturity is when you recognize what matters. I think that pretty much sums it up. There are things that are important in life, there are things that aren't important in life, and recognizing the distinction and being able to spot that distinction is very important. I'll give you an example of um, what it means to be mature. So you might think of it as somebody who doesn't pretend consequences don't exist. Consequences are real and they have an impact on you, and you cannot ignore them, and you have to treat them with respect and therefore tailor your actions with a certain dignity. So for whatever reason, the example that's popping into my mind is like the college freshman who's 19 and around real alcohol for the first time and goes around and gets plastered his whole first semester and fails out and then doesn't realize what effect that has on him. I mean, that's a lot of kids do that because they're not mature enough to recognize that failing out of college matters and that it has serious consequences. And I think that that's just a pretty good textbook example of immaturity, ignoring the consequences of alcohol abuse and doing poorly in school. That will impact you very negatively, and a mature person wouldn't wouldn't do that essentially. So you can extend that logic to pretty much avoiding any serious consequences. A mature person doesn't wreck their finances. A mature person doesn't neglect their health. And a mature person doesn't blow up relationships. You see the term mature used a lot in the context of relationships. It's often said that somebody is acting immature. And what does that mean? They're acting out of accordance with what they should be doing. Anytime that term is applied to an action, it's because that the action is bad and it should be something that you've gotten past already. Those are pretty much the two qualifiers for calling something immature. And so what you really don't want to happen is for you to go through life being immature and then having to face the consequences of your immaturity. And that can manifest itself in a number of ways, as I just described. I think it's particularly bad for people who have children at a really young age. They're just not mature enough to understand what it means to have a child, and then that ends up biting everybody. It just produces a lot of suffering when somebody's not mature enough to manage an adult relationship and care for a child, but they have one anyways. It really, really is bad for everybody involved, and it produces just so much easily avoidable suffering. Maybe easy is the wrong word, but avoidable suffering. it's important to be mature before you enter mature fields in life so that you can avoid the potentially serious consequences of screwing around and finding out, essentially. So how do you do that? How do you become mature before you bite yourself by not being mature? Well, it requires some humility to recognize that you're not above the consequences of your actions. They do have an effect on you, and that does matter. That requires a separation from your ego and pride that is part of growing up. And a lot of times that comes with age, but not always. And if you can recognize A, that your actions have consequences, and B, that your consequences matter, that is the first step. The second step is being able to accurately gauge how much the consequences of your actions matter. And that's kind of where a lot of people fail, unfortunately. So, and that can be hard because it's, you know, if you have people feeding you incorrect information about how much certain things matter, then how are you really supposed to gauge how much something matters? It can be very, very difficult. And ideally, you would seek out some trusted source for advice, or you might have to learn the hard way about how important something is, or how big of a deal a certain consequence is. Um, and then hopefully, once you do get that figured out, you might be able to pass that on to somebody else and potentially spare them the pain of having to figure it out themselves. So, yeah, I guess to recap where we've gotten so far, maturity is recognizing that actions have consequences and recognizing accurately the severity of those consequences and acting accordingly. You want to mature before you're forced to mature, which essentially means you don't want to put yourself into a really bad situation by going into it immature. Really, a really important rule in life. You need to be mature enough to handle any serious endeavor that you intend to take on, no matter what that is. And different things require different levels of maturity, but that's still a truth. And the sooner you accept it, son, the easier your life will be. So, developing maturity can be hard. And it's not always something you want to do because oftentimes it requires stepping away from the fun of the immature life, which can be really hard. Um, and I think that's the reason a lot of people never mature, because they aren't willing to give up the temporary gratification of an immature life. It's either that or just nobody ever told them what maturity is and how to get there.
So, the lesson I want you to take away from this video is that you should mature willingly before life rakes you over the coals, and you're forced to mature through immense suffering. Something that just popped into my head while I was sitting here thinking about all this is the story of the prodigal son. He was immature when he asked his father for his half of the inheritance and then squandered it on prostitutes in a foreign land. And then he had to become mature through nearly starving to death, wishing he could eat the fill of the pigs' troughs. I think that says a lot. And not only that, when he becomes mature, his life improves exponentially. And that's really important as well.
I also want to touch on the fact that your motivation for maturing shouldn't be purely hoping to avoid negative consequences. When you mature, you open yourself up to being able to handle greater things. And those greater things are often aligned with what you want. Um, and that's really important. So not only, in the same vein as the last video, not only does being immature set you up for failure and suffering, but being mature grants access to opportunities and aspirations that you wouldn't be able to achieve without maturity. So it's really very important for those two reasons. I think that's just about all I want to say. I'd like to thank all 47 of you who watched the first video. It really meant a lot. I was really gonna just give up and quit, but I didn't think I would get more than five views. But now that I got a couple of subscribers and a couple of encouraging comments, I have renewed vigor, and I'm gonna be hopefully uploading a couple of times this week and continue to go from there, and hopefully we'll just keep going up. So thank you, everybody. I hope this helps somebody. If it helps anyone at all, then all the effort I put into this will be worth it tenfold. So